Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Draw with T. So today I am taking the sketch that I did of Ysette in the last episode, and I've just brought it into Photoshop, and now I'm going to basically fix it up digitally and then, ink it, color it. Now, this episode is going to be a little different because after I color it, basically this drawing gave me a bit of trouble, and there was just something I couldn't fix, and I tried, and it just didn't really work out for me until I basically had finished it up, went off, thought about it, came back, looked at it, and I'm like, you know what? I think if I changed this thing, it would make it better. So I don't normally do that. I normally let my work stand, especially when I've literally colored it and signed it and exported the file. But in this case, I decided to go back and change it, mainly because this drawing has a purpose. It's going to be kind of a front image of a Google document. It's basically Ysette's not character sheet, because she's not a D&D character, but basically her character document, which just kind of outlines little details about her that I need to know for the story that I'm writing that she's involved in. And I realize having images of your characters in the document's front page is a great way of picking them out from the 20 other characters that you might accidentally open up. And when you're in the stride of writing, in the flow of writing, the last thing you want to do is accidentally pull up the wrong character file and be like, oh crap, and then go looking for it, picking through all these documents that you've filled. But yeah, so here the main things I'm trying to fix are Ysette's head, mainly the back and the ear area, and her eyes, which I could not make line up in a good way. I'm actually looking at what I've drawn here, and it actually looks quite nicely. I almost think maybe if I'd gone with that, it would have been all right. But as it is, sometimes when you fiddle with things so much and you're overcritical of it, you just keep changing, and you actually lose something that you could have worked with and had it done a lot quicker. Sometimes that's just how art goes. You don't realize you might have solved the problem until you're past it and you're looking at it in hindsight. Now, this goes back to what I've said a couple times about how I've recently just really not been happy with how I draw the near eye of a character. I used to have a problem with the far eye of the character, and now I've been almost always happy with how I draw the far eye, but the near eye just never seems to match the far eye, and I know that that's causing me trouble, and I try to redraw it, but it just doesn't seem to work. And I think the only way I'm going to solve that is by looking at studies and references and, trying to figure out how my style is going to look. And this is rare because, as I've also said before, I used to always nail the near eye, and the far eye just made no sense to me, and it always looked terrible. And I think that's part of what's causing the problem I'm having is I'm not so much drawing the near eye anymore. I'm drawing a symbol. My hand has learned to draw this thing, and that's just how an eye is. And it's having a hard time observing what an eye needs to be, especially like a cartoon eye. That can be harder because it's really easy to find random people and figure out how eyes look. It's a little harder when you have to cartoon it, right? And I'd say what I'm doing here is getting far too realistic, and the earlier things that I drew were better. And you can see here I'm trying to sort of use this planar method that I kind of learned to draw the far eye, and it's just not quite feeling right to me. That's maybe not so bad, but as I said, this is something that I'll be fixing after I basically color this. And we've just had a little jump cut, not much of one, and here I'm basically getting ready to move on to inking, and get ready for a topsy-turvy roller coaster ride as I try to ink with my Intuos tablet, doing a whole lot of rotating. This looks pretty queasy to me. This is just how inking used to be before Cintiqs became seemingly readily available. Well, Cintiqs, iPads, Huons, all sorts of things. Maybe one day I'll get something nice, but it won't be very soon. And a fun fact for you, it was only relatively recently that I learned the hotkey for the rotate button, or rather that Photoshop finally made a hotkey for the rotate button. Previous to this, I hated digital inking. Imagine not being able to move the canvas at all and not having a Cintiq or anything, so you couldn't just rotate this pad on your lap because you had no idea what the rotation was in relation to the artwork. And basically, you just sort of had to ink. You just had to learn how to ink from one position, which didn't really work, and I basically didn't really ink artwork for a good while there, and when I did, it looked like crap. The only way around that was to basically rotate by going up into wherever rotate is in the dock and telling it what angle you wanted. So as an artist, I don't exactly know math, so knowing whether I need like a 44-degree angle or a 36-degree angle, yeah, it was rough. It was rough back then. Obviously, technology has advanced quite a bit since then. But with that said, it's still hard to ink with the current setup I've got. It's just, the rotation is one thing, but there is still an amount of guesswork, and specifically right here, as you can see, I'm really struggling to get any sort of nice-looking circle, and I just sort of give up and, keep the sort of lopsided thing, simply because drawing a circle without really seeing where your hand is and where it needs to go, and just sort of guessing as you draw, in isolation from a tablet is hard. And I imagine with the Cintiq, it's less hard. It still can be hard to draw a circle, but just in the same way it'd be hard to draw a circle on a piece of paper, which is less hard than this. And here now you just see me fixing up Ysette's ear and her hair strand. That I decided to move a little bit more forward, of course, after I'd done all of this lovely ink work, so I had to spend some extra effort, basically just sort of getting it to fit in nicely. There seemed to be a theme with this whole drawing, is noticing things I had to change long after I'd finalized the stage that I was at. And now here you see me again trying to fix the eye. That was, it bothered me even then, and I was desperately trying to find some way of fixing it. And I maybe fix it up a little bit more here, but after I colored it, that's where I realized just kind of how much more needed to be properly done. And to be honest, I think in the end I didn't quite nail it, but I got it looking decently enough for me to move on to the next thing. And here you see I'm also fixing the nose. That was something I realized got way too big for some reason. Sometimes that happens with Ysette's nose. For some reason, only her nose. Well, hers and maybe Tristan's. Tristan's gets too long, I find. And now we're about to move on to color, so here I am just quickly laying down the background, kind of referencing what I did with Tristan's, kind of adding a bit of modeled color. And soon it'll be on to the coloring, which is pretty basic stuff. I just select the line art and basically fill it in, and I'll do a bit of shading later on. Because these are just very, very quick portraits, or they're supposed to be, I didn't really use any of the usual layer effects I tend to do when I add shading. Usually when I shade, I'll shade on a multiply layer or an overlay layer, depending on if I'm doing a highlight or a shadow. And basically what I want is for Photoshop to kind of decide what tones and colors I need in certain areas rather than me doing it. But in this instance, because I had already had the previous artwork of Ysette, I was just going to grab the colors off of that. They would look good enough, even if they weren't the actual filtered layers that I had used. I just didn't feel like opening up the Photoshop file because it was quite a big file and it would take forever to load and lag everything, and it just didn't seem worth it when I could just grab some colors off of the JPEG and adjust them there. And here you kind of see what I'm talking about. So usually Ysette's hair is on a special layer. You know, it's set to screen or something, and it's at 20%. It's a specific color. Here I'm just grabbing the colors off from the reference sheet. It's no special layer. There's no shine. There's no opacity to it, and I'm just kind of carving things in. I always use the basic Photoshop brush tool, and I always feel very insecure about that fact, but hey, it works. I try to give my artwork a sharp edge, but sometimes I just keep going to the soft edge. Again, it's something I'm a little bit insecure about, and you can thank art college for that. My thoughts on the topic are, if the effect is good and it's what you want and it looks good, who cares how you got there? If you use Comic Sans but it looks great, I don't think anybody should hold it against you. But I have a hard time kind of remembering that when it comes to me. Now I like how I decided to do the shine on the metallic parts here. You can see it kind of on that little blue bauble thing. I'm actually not entirely sure what that is. But the shine is just the basic Photoshop brush, stroked across it, and then an eraser to fade it out a little bit. And then underneath that layer, I did the shading. Usually I do it in the reverse, but it was kind of cool to do it this way this time. I'm not sure if it looks the most convincing here, but just kind of deciding to do that, that's something I'm gonna test out going forward, possibly on Tristan's armor or such. And here I'm making another quick edit. She just seemed to have way too much forehead, or the way her head slanted up there just didn't seem right, so I kind of decided to bring her hair down just a little bit. I think her forehead still seems a little bit off, but it's just supposed to be a quick portrait. So here I am signing it off, but we're not done yet. The next clip is going to be me returning and fixing Ysette up. And like I said, here I am fixing it up. So the first thing I did was to make a flattened layer of what I'd done so far, and I was just literally grabbing aspects of it and ripping it around to try and figure out what needed to happen. Here I am kind of figuring out the what do you want to call it, the architecture of her face. And I'm just trying to get the eyes to work, and in doing that I'm like, oh, well, this is how you fix the nose, which I hadn't quite realized looked bad, but in doing that, it kind of helped me figure out the eyes just a little bit better. And here I am now putting the changes into practice. I really hate changing things after I've gotten this far in it, because basically you have to sort of redo the sketch and then redo the ink and then redo the coloring, and depending on how I've done it, it can basically just mean that I'm entirely redoing the entire art process for a tiny change. In this case, it actually wasn't too bad because it was just a quick portrait, and the elements were kind of isolated in terms of it wasn't really connected to anything. Like if I had to redo a shirt or something and that touched everything else, that could be a problem. But in this case, since the eyes and the nose just kind of, the only thing they affect are, little bits of the face, it was all right. And also the face is an incredibly important part, so it's a worthwhile thing to change. Basically, I've just faded out the sketch, or the finished thing that I had changed, and I'm just inking it, basically. And then afterwards, I'll go through the color layers and fix those up, and then Ysette will be looking better. Now, I do have to say that inking over ink work is surprisingly fast and efficient, probably because the ink work is very decisive and I don't have to figure out which sketch line I want to go with when there's, 5 different ways for a sketch line to look. And then here I'm basically just erasing the original sketch work and just, fixing it up very quickly. And then I'll be merging those two together like that, and going through each color layer and just sort of quickly fixing it up. I think at this point I fixed the opacity of the face shading, and I'm glad I did that. And here I fix up the nose, and I'm quite proud of this little shade job I do in the nose. It's not perfect, but I've never been quite good with my gradients and such, so it's okay. I'm happy with it. So guys, we're getting near the end here, so let me know which version you liked more, whether you liked my first take on Ysette, or if you thought that coming back and fixing it was a good choice. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around for the next episode. I will be doing character portrait of Humphrey the Dragon. We'll be starting off with sketches, and then moving on to digital treatment like this. Yeah, so guys, have a good evening, day, whenever you're watching this, and see you around.